I get told off for not speaking loud enough, so having the headset should make things easier. Thanks all for coming. Thanks for coming to see this little talk of mine. And it's really pleased to be invited to come and speak at the first DDD East Midlands, which, rain aside, has been really good so far. So, a couple of you will know me, some of you, most of you I don't expect will. My name's Joel Hammond Turner. I work as a technical lead for a company in Reading called Landmark, who you might have heard of to do a bunch of mapping type stuff, but we do a load of other stuff as well. So what I want to do is kind of take a step on for some talks I did a couple of years ago on 20 things tech leads should be doing, and put them into the context of a project we've been doing over the last 3 years at Landmark, which will absolutely 100% impact you if you buy a property in the UK in the next few years, but you won't ever see it. So the background, this is the product we're working on. It's called Landmark Valuation Hub. Landmark actually is involved in the valuation of every residential property pretty much in the UK and most of the commercial ones. This is a product that basically the surveyors companies will use to organise those surveys. So when you ask for a survey, your case will go through our system at some point. And we've been rebuilding a 30-year-old legacy product with all the latest shiny stuff. Don't worry about taking photographs or slides. I've got all the slides available online and I will be putting the link up at the end. Do feel free to chuck your hand up if you've got questions or throw things if I'm getting off topic. So we've been building this for a while and we've had some issues. We've run into some problems and we've mostly got over them. So I want to kind of just walk through some of the hiccups we've had and how we've addressed them, and how as a tech lead I've had to come along and say, right, here's how we solve this problem today. So first up, you versus the world of project managers. Project management in a big ongoing, I use the word in inverted commas, agile project, can be an issue. How many of you have had this on a Monday morning in sprint planning from your PM? Yeah, some hands up. Your PM or BA or whoever it is that does the work is trying really hard to help you. They're trying to say, yep, great. You've been working brilliantly for the last 2 weeks on all this stuff. You finished that last sprint perfectly. Here's the next stuff that I prepared for you, which is great, which is fine, but they don't necessarily know how you want to build software. But you do. They may sort of want, from a business perspective, yeah, I want the couch. You know, however, actually I've got to build a few other bits and put them together until I can make a couch. So your problem is all about educating your PM into how you want to do things. Sounds a bit sort of pushy really, doesn't it? Say, I'm going to tell you how you're going to do your job. No, what we're actually trying to do is work with them so that they get better results out of you. All these things, we as tech leads, programmers, developers, will have seen at some point. And they're all really bad. And they all only ever come up because someone's trying to help and push things along and deliver what you've got to deliver on time, on budget. But you've got to step back. This is the first thing. We had this. We had 2 or 3 sprints where our PM quite literally gave us a list of things and we said, no. And after 3 sprints, he realized that if he gave us a list of things without telling us up front, he would get a no. It's all about the team breaking these things down. Now this ought to be common knowledge. This ought to be stuff you do all the time, and you should be going at me, well, why are you talking about this muck? But every single time I talk to developers, at some point they were going to, oh yeah, our system's broken down, we've not got time to deal with that. We've not got time to get the backlog into shape so we know how long it's going to take. But you have to. We've, the last few weeks, been doing very agile work in that we have not got a clue what's in the next sprint until the Wednesday before sprint end. But at that point, we take the whole team, we stick them in a room and say, business wants this in the next sprint to deliver our big project. How can we build it? And we've worked that for the last few months, and it's worked really well. Now, our BA, our project manager, is kind of the same. It is the same person with two hats. He goes away and actually comes up with, I want this feature, and does a breakdown that's not far off how we, the team, would break it down anyway. The education has worked. But there's one thing about that breakdown that as a team you can't miss. So that bit should be blindingly obvious. This bit is the bit that we missed for a good 2 years. Sounds crazy. You would miss a critical part of delivering software for two whole years. But it's kind of because, oh, well, it doesn't matter. We can deal with that. We'll just build it, get it working, and then work out how to deploy it. That is always, in my mind, wrong. Anything you build, that PBI, that deliverable, has got to be not only built, working, tested, it's got to be deployable, and it's got to work within the context of your system. It's all very well it being wonderful and perfect in BVT, but if you can't actually deploy it to int and beyond, into prod, what's the point? We're in the position that we don't deploy every sprint beyond our int environment because our customers take a release every 6 months or so. That's fine. But we have to be in the position that at any second we could take our int deployment and push it all the way up to live in a matter of, you would say minutes, but realistically 2 or 3 hours. The only way to do that is to get it integrated and deployable. And the other thing we've done is actually the task breakdowns. We've got a mantra. It's a deployable thing, or it's a task, or it's an epic. If it's an epic, you don't care because it's too big. If it's a task, it's got to be shuffled all the way to the right before your PBI comes off the board. And your whole goal is all the PBIs you committed to are on the right-hand side and delivered. And that means deployable, testable, and integrated. Which of course leads to this bit. This is the question you always get asked every single time. And if it's not how long is it going to take, it's why do you think it's going to take that long? You've got to understand how long it's going to take to do these things. That's obvious. But do you actually know how long it's going to take for you to write the deployment script that takes that ARM template that you had to write that will actually deploy your software up onto Azure? Because the first time you do it, you won't have a clue. We didn't. First 2 or 3 times, it took a massive amount of time to get stuff deployed. We're getting better. And the only way you get better, not only on doing it, but estimating it, is by iteration. Again, training your team to say, how long did we take? How long did we take last time? How long do we think we'll take this time? This also means you've got to record a little bit more than just how long each PBI or task in your backlog takes. We've ended up adding, for every PBI, a panic task under the PBI that's part of the deployable that we estimate as what's the worst that could happen when we're trying to build this thing, this part of our deliverable, that could stop us delivering. So it might be, okay, we expect to spend 3 hours over a sprint sorting out development environments just to get the thing smoke tested. So we put that in. Every PBI has 3 hours in it. Pads the estimates massively. They go, right, 10 PBIs, 3 hours per PBI, 30 hours? Why do you, and we do get asked, why do you possibly need that? The answer is because we might actually need it. That means you're going to deliver those PBIs within your estimates in spite of the panics. That doesn't mean that you're going to cover everything. So we have another one, which is a PBI all by itself of lost time. And on a perfect, if your deployment package is perfect, everything goes perfectly, there will be 0 time logged on it. If you had a bad week, or sprint like we had a month ago, you'll log 20 hours. 20 man-hours on a sprint of lost time because stuff blew up. But this is the feedback part. You can take it back and say, we didn't deliver, or we only delivered this much, and here's all the time we lost and why. You can then take that and say, right, we need to fix this thing properly rather than doing workarounds. You know your knowns, you can guess your unknowns. The unknown unknowns just put some capability to record it. Which leads me neatly onto this tech debt thing. Who's had an argument in the last week with a PM about doing any tech debt? Yeah, I thought there'd be a few. Just the one argument, or has it been protracted? This is your thing. You as a tech lead, it's all about you dealing with your tech debt, because no one else is going to. The business doesn't care as long as the money comes in and the product's usable. DevOps don't care as long as they're not getting called out in the middle of the night. And your PM is trying to get what the business wants through the pipeline. All absolutely valid positions to be in. The problem is all this tech debt generally will sit on your developer's shoulders in that it takes longer for things to get through the pipeline because they're working around old garbage. But there's an argument here just amongst the developers. This one, you ain't going to need it. Why would I possibly build this thing that's going to make my life easier in 6 months' time, but we're not going to need it for 6 months? Or, yeah, there's a bug there that might hit us if we get so successful we've got this much load on the server every day. Yeah, we don't need it. We're nowhere near there. Projections don't say we're going to hit that for 2 years. You ain't going to need it. Don't do it. It's the part of the Agile mantra. But you've got cohesion. You've got to understand where I'm building up this pile. And you've got to know that you can stop it. Key to that, you log it. How many people here have kind of got an idea of the technical debt of their systems in the back of their head, but don't actually have a log of what that technical debt is? No one's admitting to it. That's interesting. Ah, one there. Yes. You're doing the right thing. As soon as you find something that's tech debt, whether it's a bug that you're not going to fix, whether it's some practices that were poor and need the work reworking, whether it's some patterns or some architecture that needs fixing, log it as soon as you find it. I tell my developers practically daily, you found some tech debt? Brilliant, well done. We're not fixing it now, go put it in the tech debt backlog. The other thing we do is every 2 weeks, all the tech leads from my department get together on a call and we go back through that list, all the way top to bottom, and we say, do we care about it? Has it been fixed? Are we planning to fix it? Can we put this into our backlog? Can we sneak it in by the back door? If that's what it takes, you can do that. We prioritize as a tech debt, as a tech lead, we prioritize the tech debt. It's our responsibility. But you do have to be mindful always. There will be bits of tech debt that you can't put off. So we had a contract developer who found a piece of tech debt. It was a particularly nasty little race condition which wasn't manifesting in live at all. It was running perfectly, had been running for 6 months, but he knew that what we were about to deploy would multiply the number of times that code was executed by a factor of 10. And that would probably break it. And we said, okay, we've got 2 sprints left before we deliver. You will spend that time fixing this, and he did, and no one ever noticed because the bug never manifests because we fixed it early. But again, the tech leads prioritized and said, that's important enough. And we celebrated that. But you could also got to celebrate those little wins, the code gardening, the, oh yes, I got rid of 65 warnings from FXCOP today. That's actually quite a big win in terms of getting rid of FXCOP warnings. This is your responsibility. That's the question you need to push up the pipeline to get yourself the ability to fix these bugs that you really can't leave. So, quick summary. Estimation is your bag. You know how long it takes to estimate. You can work out how long you want to do a piece of work. You can do the breakdown. You should do the breakdown. You've got to deploy it. You've got to test it. You've got to integrate it. So make sure you cater for those tasks in every PBI. Don't forget to estimate the unknown unknowns. And then we've talked about tech debt. As a tech lead, one of the other things you're going to have to do, which is something you're going to have to fix, is deal with explosions. Several ones. Live has gone into meltdown. If you get to tell yourself live has gone to meltdown again, then maybe you need to go back and look at some of that tech debt. So I'm going to use a real example. This is a legacy forensics product that we had. And there were some obvious symptoms. This literally came in as a Sev1. This was 6 months or so ago now. Some, but not all transactions were hanging. They would go in and they would sit there and do nothing. No one could work out why. There was nothing in the logs. And our ops and support team spent probably 4 or 5 days trying to work out whether there was anything there. And I spent 2 or 3 of those looking at the code saying, can't quite see anything, not quite sure. Finally, someone came up with one smoking gun. You've always got to find the smoking gun and then validate it. In our case, the smoking gun was, oh yeah, we moved the storage area network between the 2 data centers that day. Like you do. That was the only piece of correlation. There were no errors before that, no hanging transactions afterwards. So then we went and looked at the code. And we thought, yeah, well, there's nothing particularly obvious there. And you think, yeah, there's some logging. The file system seems to be nicely abstracted. It should just throw, they should see those in the logs. That was fine, no problems. And then we found this line. There's our problem. They renamed it, they moved it, they changed permissions on it. And suddenly, this whole thing was throwing a completely unexpected error. It wasn't our fault. Someone had made a change. It really wasn't our fault. But our responsibility to find the smoking gun and go back and validate from our knowledge of the code and then prove it. We actually tweaked the test system in exactly the same way and it exhibited the same behavior. Then we could go back to infrastructure and say, you're a bunch of idiots for changing things without telling anybody. Please go and put this alias in and put the right permissions in. And it was all wonderful. Key to this, as the hint was in the line, I said earlier, there was nothing in the logs. You've got to get good logging in. I have been banging on about good logging for 6, 7 years in these sort of forums. If you don't have lots and lots of logging, or the ability to turn up the logging to 11, when you hit problems in production, you will not be able to find the fault. That's why it took so long on this Sev1 for us to work out that it was the infrastructure change. There was no logging that said, file system doesn't exist. No exception being caught. Do be aware, if you've got bad logging, yes, I've started, now I've finished, with no correlation, no data points attached to it, it's actually worse than not having it there at all. All the logging frameworks you can use as a .NET developer, Java developer, whatever, support adding contextual data into your logging. App Insights is brilliant for this. Correlation is absolutely everything. Part of the other thing, though, was no one knew where the documentation was for this particular product. And it took another 2 or 3 weeks for someone to find the magic incantation on a retired wiki that found the one page which had the note in a table, source, and had that /san on it. Try and find them. I'm spinning on quickly because I know I've got a limited amount of time. The other side of this is you will have to admit sometimes that it's your fault. Now, I was going to go into a big detailed description of a problem which we found, which got its way to live, which was entirely my fault, but I'm not going to show it because we've got to cut it down by 10 minutes. Yes. It was fairly similar. It was actually some assumptions I'd made about some legacy code, and it turned into an ON problem with high latency. The takeaways from that, legacy code, and you have legacy code about 5 minutes after you've written it, is always a minefield. Particularly if you find custom implementations of framework features. This was part of the other problem. Someone decided to build a custom HTTP client, like you do. Try using that with Azure. I know someone's told me that notation isn't correct, it should have brackets in it. In our scenario, it was actually O2N, and we turned it into ON+1, doing a loop n times with one extra call, and really it should have been an O2, as in two things, not lots of things. But any time you see that for loop, doing something in a for loop, particularly if you're talking to databases or services, that's probably a red flag, something to get rid of. That's exactly what we did with this particular sample. We wrote a new endpoint, which let us put 250 requests into one, and it blew everything out, made it so much better. If you're using Net Framework, old style, old school, HTTP client is a pain in the arse. If you're using ASP.NET Core 2.2 and above, HTTP client is beautiful and mockable and really nice, but do read Steve's blog about how to use it properly, because using it improperly will completely drain all your sockets off your server. You might get hints of the sort of code I was going to be showing you. I'm to some extent quite glad I'm not. So, you will, as a tech lead, have to deal with Sev1s. Correlation of cause can be really hard. Your logging is absolutely the first place you want to be. And this is one of these tech debt items. I've not got sufficient logging to diagnose problems in a live environment. Tech debt PBI to put in logging to diagnose in a live environment. This is all really obvious, boring stuff, or it should be. And yet, this stuff has bitten us in the last couple of years. It shouldn't have done, but we've been working hard to do other things, and so things slid a little bit. The other part is, you've got to work the problem. If you've got nothing else, replicate. Once you replicate, try and correlate. Once you've correlated, prove, in a test environment preferably. Don't forget, proof negative is as important as proof positive, because proof negative means you can ignore a whole swathe of the potential problem space. And this one hurt. You've got to say, yep, okay, we screwed up. I wrote some code that had assumptions that proved to be really, really bad for a live system, but we fixed it, or we have a plan for fixing it. Don't panic about it. You will tend, you will, there's that absolute terror when someone comes to you and say your system's falling over in a heap. Don't panic, work the problem. So the other thing I want to talk about is to do with team working, specifically offshore. So we work at Landmark, we've got a really good partnership with an offshore resource provider called UST Global. It's basically an Indian Development Centre. The way it's been done at Landmark is actually interesting because they're treated as Landmark employees, not UST employees. UST have branded an entire office space within their complex for Landmark, and everyone is a real Landmark employee, a Landmarker. This makes a big difference, brings people in. But there is a danger with offshore teams, entirely offshore teams. And the danger is you think, I'll just give them some work in a nice little silo. They won't hurt anybody. It'll be great. Silos, they're great, but they're not. Because unless you're working on a project that really is genuinely distributed and independent and can be siloed, chances are you will get cross-team dependencies. You will get, I can't deliver this feature because I'm waiting on that service from this other team. They've not checked in yet. Yeah? You will get merge conflicts where two people are making bug fixes on the same Angular page and break each other. And do you actually manage the deliveries of the two teams work independently? Are they genuinely going to deploy independently? Or actually do you need to do the integration piece? This is what we found we were doing a lot of. Last minute integration work. It's all done, it's all wonderful, it's on our branch, and then suddenly you try to merge everything to develop, and you've got a bun fight. We've pared our development effort down to just two teams now, because we're out of the initial major silo development into business as usual, just about. Even then, we still get integration effort problems and merge problems. This is why you need to make sure you've got the integration part in your PBIs, to make sure you've catered for the half a day or day that it takes you to get develop in, retest, resmoke test, make sure you're not broken, and continue. But it isn't just about scheduling work and getting it all to work together. You also need to work in the same way across the teams. This has been the biggest takeaway we've had over this project. We've got multiple teams working. If they're not working, I'm not even going to say in the same direction, in the same way, they've not got the same thought processes, you're building up technical debt for yourself for later. So specifically, you need to look for consistency in code. I keep making a mental note and forgetting it to go away and find where the research was done. But has been researched, I think it was Harvard back in about 87, 88, where they looked at people looking at code. And if it's code that's written the way you would write it, your visual cortex interprets it immediately. If it's code that's formatted in a way that's alien to you, it takes 25 to 50% longer for you to interpret it. So if you've now got everyone writing code their own way, every time someone else looks at it, they're just going to be going, what the hell? Now, it may be you genuinely look at someone's code and go, what the hell? But that's not the same as it being perfectly good code, just not looking right. Coding standards can be rather a emotive subject. People say, you don't need them, you do need them, you've got to enforce them, you don't have to enforce them. Are we professionals or not? Yes, we are all professionals. Yes, we don't particularly need any coding standards enforced on us. But If you're working in a disparate team, every little bit of time spent trying to interpret someone else's code is time that could be spent doing something else. Time that could be spent looking at that code and actually spotting problems with it. Or actually going, that's really good, I'll use that pattern myself later. We go a little bit further as well. We've got a whole bunch of checklists that are part of our code review process. And it's not just you'll use the coding standards to not use underscores. It's, as a developer, you will have done, and we have a list of about 12 things that we require every developer to do before PRing. And it's things like, it should be obvious, I have deployed to a test environment, to a benchmark environment. I've actually smoke tested it. I've looked through my code for keys and secrets in the code base that shouldn't be there. I've looked through my code for stuff that should be application configuration and isn't. Because that's all stuff the developer should look for and know about before they ever take it to code review or someone else looking at it. We have an explicit code review process where we deep dive. We'll go right from a demo, look at the front-end Angular code, look at the web API code, down into the business logic. We'll look at the whole stack, and it's very small. It's usually one feature or two features at a time. And in that code review, we'll go and say, you stuffed up your logging. Why aren't you logging this correlation key here? That's a very common one. In fact, it's so common that I went out onto Amazon and I bought a logging log. It's actually a back cushion that looks like a log. It's this big. I would have brought it with me, but it's actually been delivered to one of my developers this week because he didn't put any logging in. And he gets to keep it until the next developer stuffs up on logging, and then he can gladly pass it on. It's a tiny little joke, but the fact it's then sat on someone's desk in the middle of the office as everyone walks past means all the developers are going, oh yeah, I do need to double check my logging. And then that's revalidated through the pull request. So the code review happens before we PR into develop. This consistency, it allows for resiliency. It actually allows us to work with colleagues in India much, much more efficiently. Because they know what's expected of them. They know they can't go off-piste too far. They know that when they go into code review, this is what to expect. How are we for time? Getting there. So, spin through. There are some tools that you should be using. I'm going to call out, you know about StyleCop, FXCop. Sonar's really good for CI because it records warnings and FXCop errors and lets you graph them over time, which is good to get a handle on whether you're getting worse or better. This one is a new one to us that's absolutely essential in my mind. It is a paid product. I'm not advertising it because I've been asked to. I'm advertising because actually it does something really, really important. What it does is it goes and looks at your package dependencies and cross-checks them against a database of vulnerabilities. And their business model is when new vulnerabilities are found in your dependencies, we'll tell you. Brilliant for audit because you can say, at this point, here's all our dependencies. These are the known vulnerabilities. There are mitigations for these or not. But as I got a couple of weeks ago, email from SNCC, hey, you're using this NPM package. Someone's compromised it. Update to this version, job done. It's a tiny thing that makes you much more efficient at keeping those dependencies up to date because dependencies rot so fast, it's untrue. And I recommend checking that out and getting or something similar because making sure your dependencies are not vulnerable is a big step in making sure your software is not vulnerable. You can do the usual code coverage stuff, and the other thing that we do religiously, and it does cause arguments, but I recommend, is a rule like this. 1-2 package. If you've got a piece of code that you use in two places, that you want in one place, you want to use it in another place, copy it and paste it, that's fine. The second you have it needed in a third place, it's got to be a shared code package and reusable. There's no argument about, oh, we'll copy it now and do it later. The third time, you have to put it into a package. Otherwise, it will be oh, well, we've got 3 copies of it already, a 4th won't matter. And we did recently have a shared piece of code that was copied in 10 individual Azure functions. That one was really painful to get rid of. So, moving on, one team. One of the things we did with going offshoring was we're very lucky to be able to bring the tech leads, or the team leads, not in our parlance, full technical leads, onshore for 6 months. That way they got into the mindset of how we're doing things. But it's all about communication. It's all about sitting down, talking, what are my problems, how do I solve them? Kind of this sort of forum, really. I mentioned we had a tech leads backlog grooming session every 2 weeks. We also have a tech leads call every week on a Monday lunchtime. First thing, everyone's got in, they've started work, they've looked at what they're doing this week, and we all talk and say, here's what we're doing, here's things that will impact the other team. Cross-team communication, it should be obvious. Formalizing it and getting it in place makes a huge amount of difference. This one is really hard to get past management, but they're really valuable. We call them code sessions. They are basically at least a full team, if not full department, 1 or 2 hour conferences every 2 weeks. Get all the developers in a room, do some show and tell, do a session like this, do a technical session, have a conversation. All of you here, by the fact you are at this event, puts you in the top 5% of all developers. I had that stat from Gary Short over at Curry a few weeks ago. Just the fact you will take your Saturday to come to a DDD event means you're thinking way beyond the normal developer set. Tech lead, that's exactly where you need to be. You can take that back into your organization and actually say, I'm going to take all the developers in a room for 2 hours every second Tuesday, and we're going to do techie stuff that BAs don't need to know about. Management, not interested. You won't be interested. It's going to be way too detailed for you. That's the other part of the clean code. It's a safe space for developers, because we do need to kick off and go, why the bloody hell are they wanting us to do that? Every now and again. And under stressful circumstances, I must admit that I have done that in the middle of the office and sworn an awful lot over the last 2 weeks. Some of it isn't quite as bad as it has been in the clean code session, but it's a safe space and it's a learning space. Pairing should be obvious. You should pair. But again, you're delivering. A lot of time you don't have time to go away and pair and say, yeah, we'll just sit down and work through a problem. But that's the best way of working through a problem. Any time I've got a developer who's scratching his head, either I'll sit down with them or I'll put one of their peers in with them, say, right, sit down, sort it out, talk it through. If you haven't got an answer in 2 hours, we'll get the whole team together and we'll talk it through and sort it out. That time boxing of pairing, if you can't pair all the time, which I very much doubt anyone here is in a work environment where they can pair all the time, that time boxing of pairing gives you really, really big benefits. So I mentioned some tools. There's some really easy things you can do as well to help with a one team. I mentioned coding standards. Yes, you can just apply them and say, fix all the warnings. It's really useful to define them and put them somewhere that the developers can find them, and you can just say, yeah, go look in there. Whatever standards you have, it doesn't matter whether you use underscores or not. Document those standards. We're developers, let's stick it all as markdown in a repo. Really easy for everyone to find, that's where they are. Goes beyond that, then you can start putting in expectations about logging. You can start putting in, here's how we use HTTP clients with Poly to do resilience. Worked examples. In the broader sense, who here has heard of the try.net thing that's just getting going? Try.net is basically a framework that lets you build live documentation for code. And it's used to demonstrate .NET constructs and patterns in a live coding environment. It's really interesting. And that's a really good opportunity for your standards here. So if you've got a way of doing logging, here's how we do logging. You can write it out as a try.net and let them play with it live. But do document them with a repo. Don't use SharePoint. It's all about communicating. You've got Teams or Slack, do use them. We really had trouble getting going with Teams. We were really good on Slack, but got forced onto it. We're now in the point where we have team chats, which are just ongoing, rolling. Yep, constant conversations, even though we're mostly sat next to each other, just because every now and again, someone's working from home, someone's in a small office because they've taken themselves away. That communication lets you record what you're doing, have that discussion. But remember, it's still a textual conversation. There will be times where it's much better to get up and go and talk to someone or go in a room and discuss it. If you're going to have an argument, take it into a small room. Don't do email change. Hopefully no one here has to suffer too often an email chain, particularly because it's very easy for management to get CC'd in and they, through all the best intentions, can suddenly go, right, we need to have a big meeting about this. Not necessarily necessary. Get them involved when you need it. But it's all about communication. I'm now down to 5 minutes, I think. What's this one though? Oh yeah, one team, make sure you've got expectations about keeping things tidy, refactoring. Oh yeah, just to explain this major updates and code gardening, this is actually a chart of the progress in some of our projects of migrating from VS 2015 style projects to SDK projects, which seems like a little thing, but quite a lot of work to do. But that also reduced the number of vulnerabilities in our software quite drastically as soon as we hit the links. Why is this important? We're measuring your progress. As a tech lead, you really need to be able to say, hey, look what we've done. Here's the progress, even if it's not visible in terms of new features. Test coverage is not necessarily a good one. It's kind of handy to know. But dependencies are really important. And we talked about those tools. Yeah, okay, you can use Excel if you really have to, if you're a masochist. So, do apply coding standards. I know it's potentially horrible, but it makes a big difference. Do use style cop, warnings as errors. Have checklists. Do deep dives. Do code reviews. Do package for reuse. Who here, as a developer, doesn't use something like nCrunch? You don't use nCrunch, Phil. Use nCrunch. Unless you've got the Enterprise Edition of Visual Studio, which includes live testing, i.e. tests that run all the time as you type, nCrunch runs all the tests as you type. If you've never seen it in action, it is the biggest productivity tool for getting developers to write tests you have ever seen. Because that cycle of, I've got to stop writing my test, compile, run the test, see if it went, click on there to look at the error message. Oh, there it is. That cycle of 1 or 2 minutes is a real impedance to writing tests. This tool, you write the code, you write the test, you get green blobs on the side of the code. After 1 day of using it, for the first time, one of my devs said, why did you never tell me about it? I said, I did tell you about it all last year and you didn't take it. Those are really good. We mentioned package for reuse. I've got a whole different talk about IOC bootstrapping and packages. Do tech leads catch-ups, do clean code sessions. Now, this is an interesting one. If you can, I've never quite been able to get this right. I know I want to get it to, and this try.net will probably help with it. Reference implementations. If you've got coding standards, if you want people to use particular patterns of software development, which you should, particularly across disparate teams, have a reference implementation so you say, look here, here's how you do it. Our problem, which is why I've not got it right yet, it's a moving target. ASP.NET Core, for example, is a total nightmare to keep up with. And that's the smallest part of the reference implementation for a system like ours. I've whistled through this because I know we're slightly tight for time. I'm probably coming up on, what, 1 minute left? There we go. Have we got any other questions? Otherwise, I will be outside having a coffee. No? Brilliant. Thank you very much. I hope you've learned something.